Okay. Good evening, and thank you for joining the Prince George's County Historical Society for its March 24th, 2025 History Chat about the upcoming exhibition on the Columbia Air Center at the College Park Aviation Museum. I'm Donna Schneider, President of the Society. I want to thank our members for joining us this evening. The Society relies solely on funding from members, sponsors, and donations to support our Frederick DeMar Library of County History and programs like these History Chats. If you are not already a member, please consider becoming one or making a donation to help us keep things like this History Chat free for all to enjoy. This History Chat will be recorded, so please mute your microphones. You will be able to find the recording on our YouTube channel, which you can access through our website, www.pghistory.org. We will answer questions at the end, so please put any questions you may have in the chat box, and we will get to as many as we can. Now, to introduce our guest tonight, Curator of Collections Luke Perez will present the Columbia Air Center's history and discuss the status of the museum's groundbreaking exhibition. Columbia Air Center was the first licensed, Black-owned and operated airport in the United States. It was based in Croom, Maryland, and it was the home of the D.C. area's Black aviation community and was a vibrant community space from 1940 to 1962. College Park Aviation Museum has been honored to work with 4 Columbia Air Center's descendant families and pilots to develop a permanent exhibition for this overlooked history. The exhibition, Columbia Air Center, Determined to Fly, will be located in one of the museum's 3 800-square-foot galleries and is scheduled to open to the public in the fall of 2025. Luke Perez has been the College Park Aviation Museum's Curator of Collections since 2021. He has a background in 20th century history and 9 years of experience in the museum field. He is committed to meaningfully preserving College Park Airport's and Prince George's County's unique history. Besides the Columbia Air Center Determined to Fly, Luke is also completing the Berliner Helicopter, America's Forgotten First Helicopter exhibition, also set to open in 2025, and is leading the museum's collections stewardship project. Welcome, Luke.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Luke Perez. I'm the Curator of Collections, and I am originally from the California area. I've been in the DC area for about 10 years, and like Donna said, I've been at the College Park Aviation Museum since 2021, and before that I was at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, where I was a cataloging assistant specialist for the Division of Political History. I did not originally have a background in aviation, but I have been learning so much since joining, and I am happy to talk to you about one of the biggest projects I have been working on, which is Columbia Air Center. So let me share my screen. Okay. So let's begin. So to talk a little bit about the museum, the College Park Aviation Museum is dedicated to preserving, interpreting, and promoting aviation history and innovations at College Park Airport and Prince George's County. We engage and inspire our community and visitors with diverse stories through education, exhibitions, and programming. In College Park Airport, our focus is the world's oldest continuously operating airport, in operation since 1909. Here's a photograph of the Maryland Aviation Festival from 2023, I believe. And as I had said before, introduction about myself, but let's begin with the topic everyone is here for today. What is Columbia Air Center? So it's located in Croom, Maryland, and it operated from 1940 to 1962. It is DC area's overlooked historic Black-owned and operated airport. And I want to clarify, the business and entity was Black-owned. The land itself was leased. It was the first licensed Black-owned and operated airport in the U.S. The first Black-owned airport in the U.S. was Robbins Airport, which was based outside of Chicago. It opened in 1933, opened by the Challengers Air Pilots Association, but it was opened about 6 months or less. Storm destroyed the hangar and the aircraft there, and there was a new white-owned airport closer to Chicago on the Chicago South Side called Harlem Airport, and the owner of that actually invited these displaced Black pilots to fly at Harlem Airport, of course, in a segregated fashion. I would go as far as to consider Columbia Air Center the first successful Black-owned airport because of its longevity and its legacy. So to begin, the Columbia Air Center was located in Croom in Prince George's County, Maryland, about 26 miles southeast of the U.S. Capitol building. It opened in 1940 as Riverside Airfield. In the fall of 1940, it was operated by the Cloud Club, and it operated Howard University's civilian pilot training program, which was that should be one of only seven in the nation. But in 1942, it closed with the onset of World War II, and it stayed closed during the war and was used by the Naval Support Facility at Anacostia for practice. And then it reopened at the end of 1944 by John Green and Dr. Coleridge M. Gill under the new name of Columbia Air Center. And here's a map of how far it is. 1954, John Green retires. From 1954 to 1956, Irv Jones and Charles Wren assume operations under the name W&J Flying Services. Jones ends up leaving in 1956. The Capital Flying Club, which is just another assortment of pilots, assumes operation. The airfield is called Columbia Airport or Croom Station at times. And then in 1962, the long-term landowner Rebecca Fisher dies, and her heirs refuse to lease to African Americans. The airport closes, and the land is sold to the MNC PPC, which is how the commission owns it today. But before we begin, I want to point out that I will use the term Columbia Air Center to refer to the entire history of this airfield, even though the airfield had different names at different times. And this information really comes from the partnerships and collections of 5 to 6 people and families, and some archival research and some newspaper research. There is still a lot of information that we don't know, and we really hope to grow that. But we are excited to have as much information as we do from this. And to repeat, this is going to be a brief introductory history. There will be a lot of details I miss that we don't have the time for, but hopefully more you will be able to uncover it when you visit the museum's exhibit when it opens. So we'll start off with the setting of Black aviation in the 1920s and 1930s. Prejudice and racism were the major social barriers to aviation. It was also very expensive. There were very few pilots for the first 20 years of aviation. Bessie Coleman was one of the first famous African American aviators, but she had to go to France to earn her license in 1921. As you can see here, by 1935, there were less than 50 licensed African American aviators. Chicago and Los Angeles were the hubs of Black aviation at this time. It really starts blossoming at the late 1920s, early 1930s. As I said, less than 50 licensed black pilots at the time, but not all members or not all pilots would have had license at the time. Though Chicago and Los Angeles are the centers of Black aviation, DC's birth of Black aviation kind of discovered something recently. It may have started as early as 1933. So this is, I believe, I don't remember the name of this book. It might be the Negro Yearbook from 1936, and it lists two Black pilots from the DC area, Jesse McCoy Hansen and R. Grayson McGuire. Jesse McCoy Hansen appears to be the first Black aviator in the DC DMV area. He shows up in newspapers. It's the head of the Colored Junior Air Legion, which met at the 12th Street YMCA. They made airplane models, seems to have taught some theory. There's no mention of him having a license at that time, though, so it's not sure if he was a pilot yet or aspiring to be a pilot. And then there are only 2 mentions 3 years apart of Hansen attempting to open a Black-owned airport in Forestville, Maryland. It's no mention of it being successful or not, but I will bring that up again in a later time. So this is a nebulous beginning, but and this is a highlight of the airports in the DC area around the 1940s. So there's a huge congregation of them in the College Park area, the Maryland border of Northwest DC, some in Northern Virginia, as well as further out in Prince George's County. The brown ones here are the military Army airfields. And this is a map of the DC's Black population from racial covenants in DC in 1940. And going directly, this is the known sites where black pilots could fly in the 1930s. So most of it will be located, there's two bottom ones for now, the Beacon Field in Hydro Valley in Fairfax County. Hanson's Airport is the one I mentioned in Forestville, where we don't know how long it actually was open for. And Buzzards Point was actually just a stretch of water on the Anacostia, which someone flew a seaplane out of. So the birth of DC's Black aviation community, I would really credit it to pioneer aviator Charles Alfred Anderson. He moves to the DC area in 1938. He partners with a businessman named Noble D. Butler, and they start a flying school. This Arlington Aviation on the far left is his he attempts to open an air school there. They have ads for it in the newspaper in the fall of 1938, and it's unclear if he has to start an airfield because he isn't allowed to fly elsewhere, or if because he's partnered with a businessman he's able to. The first newspaper advertisement is September 9th, 1938. The school is in the border of Fairfax County and Alexandria, and Anderson teaches both white and black students. And as opening in an airfield, they have to get licensed, a certification from the Civil Aeronautics Authority, which is the precursor to the FAA. And seems that the community rallies against this. And even though I believe they are awarded the certificate, the license to operate an airfield, their landowner ends the lease, and the school only lasts 2 months or so. And who is Charles Alfred Anderson? Well, he was one of the major black aviation pioneers. He learned how to fly. His life is emblematic of the experience at the time. He was living in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, and in his early 20s, he wanted to learn how to fly. But the local flying club wouldn't teach him. He was able to get the help from his community to purchase an airplane. I believe it was $1,500. Even though he purchased his own plane, the local flying club wouldn't teach him. Though they would let him rent space on the airfield. He would taxi around, but he wouldn't take off because he didn't know how to fly. He has quite a few obstacles, but eventually befriends a German immigrant and World War I pilot who calls himself the Flying Dutchman. And the Flying Dutchman owns an airport, and he teaches Charles Anderson how to fly. And with Flying Dutchman's support in 1932, Charles Alfred Anderson becomes the first African American to earn an air transport pilot's license, which many describe as the PhD of pilot's licenses. But once he earned this, his white employer fired him, saying, "Let your license take care of you." So it wasn't just that there was a lack of support for black aviators. If someone was even reaching out to earn that for themselves, there was a lot of pushback from Jim Crow society. Here's a series of clippings from the airport that when Anderson tried opening, he has a right to fly. Airfield gets his license in Virginia. But as I said, the landowner, even though Virginia did grant the license to Charles Anderson, which he himself admits to being very surprised about, the landowner terminated the lease. So this airfield never properly got off its feet. But a group of his students, after his time in Arlington, when he was teaching on the seaplane, form a group called the Cloud Club. It's first mentioned in July 1939 in the social column of the Afro-American newspaper. It's highlighted at the bottom, and all it really is just a list of names have become aviation-minded, will have formed an aviation club, and will jointly buy an airplane. They may have gone by a different name before incorporating as the Cloud Club in 1940. And these individuals were mostly business or well-to-do class men, mostly in the late 20s and their 30s. They learned how to fly out of the Buzzards Point in Anacostia, but they then moved to Hybla and Beacon airports before establishing Riverside Airfield. So Arlington Aviation Airfield there lasted less than 6 months. They fly out of Beacon and Hybla Valley, which I believe I want to say is about 18 miles from central DC. It's quite far. They are neighboring airports, really on the same road. And to highlight some of the members, I said they were from the DC Black Elite. That's a bit of an understatement. John R. Pinkett Jr. was the son of John R. Pinkett Sr. He was the owner of the city's first black real estate insurance firm. Henry Lincoln Johnson Jr. He was the son of Henry Lincoln Johnson Sr., who was the leading black Republican lawyer and politician, member of President William Howard Taft's Black Cabinet. the DC's eighth Black Recorder of Deeds, the first being Frederick Douglass, and his mother was the Harlem Renaissance poet Georgia Douglas Johnson. So these are really come from cream of the crop families. So these are the members of the of the Cloud Club. And now we'll jump quickly. So while these individuals were being taught by Anderson in Northern Virginia, Anderson also began operating Howard University's civilian pilot training program. This began in the fall of 1939. The civilian pilot training program was the first government-sponsored civilian flight training program, as the name says. It was in preparation for World War II. There were only 4,000 pilots in the military in the U.S. in 1939, and some military officials, understanding that the U.S. would probably get wrapped into World War II, wanted to start training pilots to do that. The military was not so much interested, so that's why it's a civilian pilot training program. It was a huge entryway into aviation. It mostly, of course, benefited white men, but women and some women programs were allowed, and even fewer black programs were allowed. There were 7 black programs out of almost 2,600 programs. Howard University was one such program, and Charles Anderson taught the first year of that program from fall of 1939 to spring of 1940. Here are some snapshots of the program from a 1941 Howard University yearbook. So Anderson taught that. He had moved into the DC area in 1938. He begins teaching the Cloud Club. Then he begins teaching Howard University. But then the summer after he starts teaching that, in the summer of 1940, Tuskegee Institute poaches Anderson for their own such program. So there's now Howard University Civilian Pilot Training Program without an instructor. That's where the Cloud Club steps in. They step in, and they're still in Beacon Field at the time, but because the Black aviation community has been growing, tensions have been rising as well. Tensions really boil over when Anderson leaves. It's unsure if he was keeping the relations harmonious or if this was just bound to happen, but this is one article from the Afro-American. The writer basically summarizes: when too many dark faces showed up at the airport, the manager kicked them out. They get kicked out of first, I always get them confused, I believe Beacon Field. They get kicked out of there, possibly because they purchased an airplane from someone that wasn't the airport owner. They moved to Hybla Valley, which is just next door. And then the manager there really treats them terribly. So the Cloud Club willingly are kind of forced out. They decided they're putting up with too much, so they decided to look for an airfield of their own by October of 1940. They look around in the Maryland area, and they eventually find a large unused potato field. And this is an excerpt from one of the founders. The majority of us agree that this was utopia, but others bitterly complained that the distance from Washington was too great and forevermore would have nothing to do with the activities of the club. As you can see, Riverside is all the way down here. It is, what did I say, 28 miles. That's about 10 miles more than Hybla Valley was, and Hybla Valley was already quite far. But it was a space, we don't know the relationship with the landowner, Rebecca Fisher, too much, but she was a white landowner, but she seemed more than supportive of the Cloud Club renting there. And they opened the name Riverside. They name it Riverside Airfield for it being on the banks of the Patuxent River. It's operated by the Cloud Club. It opens in the winter of 1940, and by January of 1941, they are operating Howard University's civilian pilot training program. As I said, the land was rented from a white woman, an Eastern Shore resident, Rebecca Fisher, rented for $50 a month, and that's the same price for rent all 22 years of its operation, which is incredible to think of now. They received the contract to lead Howard University's program. That's how they actually earned their license, through operating the civilian pilot training program. All our programs, all airfields in the program had to earn their license. Probably hyper aware of how Anderson was received by the Northern Virginia community in 1940, where the community really railed against him. The Riverside Airfield, part of the program was they had to post a big notice. They had to post a big sign saying that they are applying for certification to operate a airfield. So cleverly, they erect a giant notice, but they put it on the side on the riverside, on the riverbanks facing out towards the woods and to the farmland. So actually the away opposite from the road, so no one can, they aren't giving the community an opportunity to protest against them. There are no complaints that we're aware of. For the first, it's fantastic. It's a huge success. There are many newspaper articles like this clipping here, um, ranging air shows, community events, and the Cloud Club members who are new to aviation, most they've been flying for 2 years. They realize they're in over their heads. They asked one of their most seasoned their most seasoned and experienced pilots members to manage it, and they asked that person is John Green Jr. So here's a picture of one of the only pictures we have of the Cloud Club. This is most of the Cloud Club board with Jimmy Lunciford. Jimmy Lunciford was a famous jazz musician. Uh, don't exactly know how he learned of the Cloud Club, and he joined right away. A few of the Cloud Club members own jazz. There were one or two jazz club owners as members of the Cloud Club, so that might have been how they learned. Jimmy Lunciford joined the Cloud Club immediately, and he even had some of his band members physically help build the hangars in the airport when they were constructing in 1941. That's John Green in the top right, top row, second to the right, and then Jimmy Lunciford to the left of him. And before I get further in, I'm always asked about women at Riverside Airfield. There definitely were. We don't know a lot about them. We definitely don't know any personal information. We mostly get this information from newspapers as well as through the roster of the civilian pilot training program. We know for certain that there were 4 women members. They show up in this article here as well as the article from before. And of course, the civilian pilot training program itself was co-ed. The first year it actually was not, and the first year was not when it was under Chief Anderson, and the reason that was cited for it not being co-ed was that the facilities at Hybla Valley and Beacon Field were so poor that they didn't want the women to bear through that. But when it moves to Riverside Airfield, they start allowing women. I want to point out Frances Cecilia Pinkett, or Flaxie Pinkett, was John Pinkett's younger sister. Pinkett was the president of the Cloud Club, and we'll talk more about him. And I want to point out here, yes, that article in the center from Capital Spotlight, there were women involved even before it was officially named the Cloud Club. So this article is from April 13, 1940. The Cloud Club doesn't officially incorporate until May. Here's an aerial view of Riverside Airfield from 1943. This is when the Navy used it. So you see the road. I don't know if you see my mouse cursor. You see the road up here. They said that they put the sign for the notice somewhere along the river. And then here's an aerial view today. And I like to point out, you can actually surprisingly see some remains of the air center here, of the runways, these compass roses. It's incredible. So I mentioned John Green earlier. In 1941, the Cloud Club asked John Green to manage the airport. He himself is a very overlooked pioneer, sort of on the caliber with Chief Anderson. He was born in Georgia in 1900. He started a mechanics degree at Hampton Institute, but in 1922 he moved to Boston. I believe when his mother died, he moved up to Boston to be with his father, but he also mentioned he moved to Boston to hopefully find an outlet for his aviation interest. There was he would go to the airport on the weekends to watch the airplanes fly, and he saw that one pilot was giving flights to tourists, and he worked up the nerve to ask him. He had a dollar. He went to the pilot and asked for a flight, and afraid that he would get turned away, the pilot said yes, and they started talking to each other. And it turned out the pilot's last name was also Green, Walter Green, I believe, and it was a friendly flight. And when they landed, John Green was leaving. Walter Green asked him if he wanted to learn to fly. Walter Green actually operated a flying school out of an airport south of Boston, Quincy, Massachusetts, and that's how John Green started to learn how to fly. He apparently learned how to fly, and he says he could have earned his license by the 1920s, but he was told that he would not be given a license if he were to apply for it. So he didn't actually earn a license until the early 1930s. But he was a mechanic. He finds a job at one of the small aviation companies up there. He becomes the first black licensed airplane mechanic and the second black pilot to earn an air transport license. Chief Anderson, as we mentioned earlier, was the first black pilot to earn an air transport license. He's very interested in education from early on. While in Boston, it seems that he tried starting an aviation school, or at least tried teaching or started teaching a program for an aviation school. In the bottom left is a resume that he wrote himself. You can see it for his work and courses. Um, and a fun fact, he was a noted parachute jumper. He apparently always flew with a parachute in part because he was flying once in Boston. His plane had difficulties, so he had to crash land in the Charles River. He had a parachute on at the time, but he was too low to deploy it properly. He was saved by onlookers, and we have part of a telegram that says that's from the local army saying, "We fished your plane out of the river, come pick it up." In 1940, he was actually asked to be a civilian pilot training program instructor at Chicago's Coffee School for Aeronautics. That's the first black aviation school. And if anyone knows black aviation, it's extremely famous. And we have letters from Willa Brown asking him to be an instructor for them. We don't have his response, but he does not say no. At the same time, he gets letters from Washington, D.C. ask editor for the newspaper, I don't remember the name. Washington,
Alexa,
D.C.'s
time.
public schools want to start a aeronautics program for the vocational heights schools, but they cannot find a black instructor to teach it. This newspaper man writes John Green saying, "You seem very qualified. We need you to teach this program. If you say no, we will not get a black instructor. We'll get a white instructor. And if that's the case, we don't even know if this program will move forward." Green says yes. He moves to DC in the summer of 1940, which is the same time when the Cloud Club starts having tensions with the Hybla Valley and the Beacon Airfield. Here are snapshots of his scrapbook where he collected his licenses and his certifications. He's asked to become manager in October of 1941, but World War II breaks out in December of 1941, so he's manager for a very short time. The Cloud Club quietly dissolves. They all go to serve the war effort in various ways. The U.S. Naval Reserve base at Anacostia commandeers the space and uses it for training. This is a snapshot from the National Archives, where eventually the Cloud Club does sue to get some damages for lost funding. They get around $3,000, I believe. The Cloud Club members spread throughout the nation. A lot of them, we don't know where they go. We know John Pinkett becomes a civilian flight instructor at Tuskegee alongside Chief Anderson. And John Green, he's in his 40s, so he's too old to serve. We don't know if he enlists himself or is drafted, but he starts serving at the Camp Springs Army Airfield, which is Andrews Air Force Base now. He serves as an airplane mechanic. And it's probably because of his staying in the region, he is able to be aware of when the Navy stops using Riverside Airfield. And when they stop in mid-1940, he reaches out to have the land released back to him. And with the help of Dr. Coleridge and Gill, he opens it up as Columbia Air Center. So here, actually, bottom left is the letter of the temporary authorization to operate airport at Columbia Air Center from December 18th, 1944. John Green opens it, financed by Dr. Coleridge and Gill. The Navy had improved it slightly. The Navy increased from 4 runways to 8 runways. Yes. And to talk about Dr. Gill, he was really essential to the operation of Columbia Air Center. He was their major financier. He was a New England native, moves to the DC area to attend medical school at Howard University, and he received his degree in 1938. He always wanted to be a pilot. He tried joining the Tuskegee Airmen, but as a married man with a child on the way and as a doctor, he was turned down. I don't yet know exactly when he knows John Green, but John Green was also a Bostonian himself. They become friends, and like I said, I don't know if he's involved with the Cloud Club, but is essential to operating the Columbia Air Center. This is a photo that I had not seen before. This is from the Library of Congress. This is from 1947. This was taken for, I believe, the Washington Evening Star by a photographer. So on the left, you see that small hangar. That was the original hangar built in 1941. I believe they said they bought that from a catalog. There's a small office building, and then there's some cars there. This is the larger hangar that they build with once it opens as Columbia Air Center. And as time goes on, John Green acquires some temporary buildings that were used by the war. I believe it grows beyond this, but this is really the clearest photo of Columbia Air Center that we have. So Columbia Air Center, Green named an air center to emphasize the use of this space for more than just flying. It was a social and educational space as well as a place to learn how to fly. Green started the first all-black Civil Air Patrol Squadron, Columbia Squadron, in about 1946, 1947. And quickly there are two other all-black Civil Air Patrol Squadrons that open as well. And Green is still teaching aeronautics in the Black DC vocational schools at the time, and he would often take students from the school to Columbia Air Center. And I wanted to also say that this was an integrated space. I believe there was at some point where we have a document that says around a quarter of the students were white for, I believe, in 1952. But besides, and they also had some white instructors. I believe, and when it was Riverside Airfield, there were three instructors, one of which was white. Unfortunately, though, we don't have a lot of details besides that being acknowledged. Columbia Air Center. So, as I mentioned, none of the Cloud Club members seem to join, but many of the new members are involved with the Civil Air Patrol. A lot of there were a lot of the Tuskegee Airmen civilian pilot training program. They trained a whole new giant cohort of black aviators, but after the war, there was really no place for them to fly. No companies were hiring them. The Civil Air Patrol was a very important outlet for that. It offered these pilots a chance to keep on flying. It didn't pay them per se, but it gave them a chance to keep on flying as well as to train future cadets. The Civil Air Patrol Squadron majorly had cadet programs which exposed youth to aviation. They really didn't fly often. They usually wouldn't become pilots, but they would visit airfields. And it was just a major influence on young audiences. Just how people join the Boy Scouts, but they don't grow up to be park rangers necessarily. Here's the only picture we have of Rebecca Fisher. She's in the middle, and that's John Green on the left. We don't have the year, but I believe it would be probably late 40s or early 50s. Honestly, I have no more information besides that, but I think it's incredible that we have this photo. And then here's a snapshot from the Maryland Airport Directory. This is College Park on the left. I'm sorry, Columbia Air Center on the left, College Park on the right. And you can just see the number of runways. John Green was a very thorough airport manager. It's really quite astounding. He preserved a lot of his material in scrapbooks. We have release cards. We have some traffic patterns. We have some rules and regulations. And I just want to say I don't have anything equivalent like that of this era from College Park Airport. As I believe mentioned before, he acquired some war surplus material to support Columbia Air Center. I mentioned some temporary buildings, but you also get something called Link Trainer, which was one of the first flight trainers. It was just a great, safe way to introduce people to flying without actually putting them in an airplane. And there's stories of him convincing the carpenters at the school he worked at to come to the airport and do some maintenance work in exchange for flights. And on the left here, he was invited to lead a workshop at the Civil Air Patrol National Conference in 1952, and I believe he's asked to do it a few more years, which is incredible. I believe he would be the only black presenter at the time, and the entire time there was never a casualty at the Columbia Air Center, which he always bragged about. And to talk about women at Columbia Air Center, again, there's very little information. But the information we have really does come from the Civil Air Patrol. You can see I'll highlight here. The Civil Air Patrol was a opportunity for women as well. There's this photo here. We don't know who it is in the photo, but there were quite a number of women involved. Some more photos here. The one on the right is actually John Green's wife, Eunice Daniels, posing with an airplane. And then one of the few women that we know anything about is Gladys Combs, Gladys Odie. We have a small loan from her daughter who lives, I believe, out in Ohio. She was Gladys Odie was a Missouri native who moved to the Washington, D.C. area to be close to her sister. She worked in the federal government. And she just saw an advertisement in a trolley car that saying, "Want to learn how to fly?" I think a bit like this advertisement right here, learn to fly. So she calls up the phone number and she says that the man on the phone was kind of surprised to hear from a woman, but he said, sure, come on by. You should learn how to fly. This is her Civil Air Patrol card. Um, this is her posing in the plane on the left. She says she never flew in a plane that big, but she liked posing with them. Um, and on the left is one of the only, we have a scan. We don't have any originals, but it's a scan of the airport register, and it's incredible. Wish we had the rest of it, but you can see Eloise Butler there. So there were definitely women and more women involved than before the war, but to what extent we don't exactly know. So come 1954, John Green retires. The same year his wife dies. He also, for a few years, had been wanting to return to school to finish his bachelor's degree, which he did not finish. It seems that with the confluence of events, he decides to retire, to return to Hampton Institute to finish his degree. This is him in his graduation cap in 1960. But the airport continues. The members of the Columbia Air Center band together, notably Herbert H. Jones and Charles Wren, assume operation. The name seems to be W&J Flying Services. Jones leaves at some point, possibly due to a private commercial job. And then, so Jones leaves, but other pilots step in and they form the Capital Flying Club. And at first, a lot of people believe that the airport ceased operation in 1956, but we've come across these agreements from 1962 that show that the Columbia Air Center was still operating in 1962. There's a contract with the skydiving club as well as with the motorcycle race club. Though the attendance really does start dwindling around 1956 or so. So there seems to be a few major reasons why. One of the major reasons is that once John Green left, a lot of people were staying for John Green. When John Green left, a lot of closer airports had started desegregating. So when John Green left, some folks decided to fly out of airports closer to them. Airports were slowly desegregating at the time. It's expensive to operate an airport. There's only so many pilots out there, and it became obvious to airport owners that they preferred to have paying customers rather than to be hardline prejudiced. But we don't exactly have a clear list of where these pilots who leave Columbia Air Center go to, but it seems a few went to Hyde and Executive Field. Another major reason for dwindling attendance is the expiration of the GI Bill. The GI Bill helped veterans pay for schooling, and that includes flight schools. Most white schools and the GI Bill overall really did not properly benefit African American veterans, and the government really did not much to enforce it. A lot of schools just wouldn't take GI Bill money for African Americans, but Columbia Air Center did. But when the GI Bill expired, that was a big funding source for a lot of the pilots. So then Rebecca Fisher dies sometime in the 1960s. I don't have a specific date. Might be 1962 itself. And her heirs say they will not lease to African Americans, and instead they sell the land to MNC PPC, and it becomes part of the Patuxent River Park. There's a huge legacy of Columbia Air Center. It was a community space as well as a flight school. It was born out of circumstances unique to the DC area. There's an established Black community, including business class and elite. Federal jobs provide a lot of stability for the community, and a lot of pilots are federal employees. There's racism, of course, to prevent integrated flying or even segregated flying like there was in Chicago and Los Angeles, but there's not enough but it's not vitriolic enough to completely prevent black aviation completely. And there's a huge emphasis on education amongst the black pilot of the Columbia Air Center community. From Hansen, who predates this, you can tell he started off teaching folks at the YMCA about aviation and building model airplanes, to Anderson trying to open up a flight school right away, to Green. There's a huge emphasis on education, and part epitomized too by the Civil Air Patrol cadet program. And one of the lasting legacies that Fred Pitcher becomes one of the first black commercial pilots flying for Western Airlines, which will become part of Delta, I believe. And we cannot talk, we have to mention any relationship to the Tuskegee Airmen. Father of the Cloud Club is Charles Anderson, who is also the father of the Tuskegee Airmen. And then John Pinkin, who is the Cloud Club president, becomes a Tuskegee Airman instructor. And this next one's a bit of a loose connection, but it's still a connection nonetheless. So the first year of the Howard University Civilian Pilot Training Program, there was a student called Yancey Williams. He was taught by Anderson, and he flew out of Hybla Valley. He might have also been taught by some of the Cloud Club members. We don't know who else helped Anderson in this program. In 1942, when the war breaks out, he goes to enlist to join the Air Force, but he's denied because he's black. And then he sues with some counsel from the NAACP, including the special advisor Thurgood Marshall. He sues under the separate but equal. He says, there isn't a black Air Force for me to join. So you either allow me into one Air Force exists, or there is a black Air Force, or you create a black unit that I can join. And the day he files the lawsuit, the day after he files the lawsuit, the Air Force just announces that it's going to open up a segregated unit, which becomes the Tuskegee Airmen. A lot of people discuss whether or not Yancey Williams actually if this actually played a pivotal role in creating the Tuskegee Airmen, if they just happen to coincide. I'm not going to enter that discussion. I'm just saying it is a nice link to the DC black aviation community and history. And then Herbert H. Jones Jr., who was co-owner of the Columbia Air Center after June left, he will go on to create and lead the International Air Association, which is the first black-owned charter airline in the 1970s, which is based out of DC and Baltimore. And here's a list of the names that we have. We only really know the stories of about 6 individuals, but we have quite a few names of people that we knew who flew out of Columbia Air Center. And I'm really hoping, I'll talk about this a little more later, that this exhibit is a step into tracking down the descendants of a lot of these people. So the Columbia Air Center history, talking about how it's preserved, kind of talking about why does the College Park Aviation Museum have this history. So many of the members of Columbia Air Center preserved their own items for history, their own items from Columbia Air Center. Most of them remain involved in the Black aviation community afterwards. So, for example, a lot of organizations name their local chapters after members of the Columbia Air Center. The Negro Airmen International named their local chapter after John Green. The Black Pilots American named their local chapter after Herbert H. Jones. And the East Coast chapter of Tuskegee Airmen named their local cadet program after Herb Jones. And then there's also local grassroots historians preserve history. Grassroots historians preserve this history and majorly in the 1980s or so. Dr. Patricia Sluby, for example. And then there's also the Prince George's County Parks and Recreation Department's Black History Project, which in the 1980s interviewed John Green, began preserving some of this material. But the Black History Project at the time was only one individual and they didn't have a site or a staff, so that the items they collected actually go to the College Park Aviation Museum, which is the county's aviation museum, which is how we started with this collection. And since then it has grown, and most notably it started growing quite a bit since 2017. And we started this exhibit, planning for this exhibit, writing for this exhibit in 2022. And of course, we'd like to thank all the families who have started donating and reaching out to us since then to tell us about their family's history and connection to Columbia Air Center. So then to talk briefly about our exhibition, Determined to Fly. It's scheduled to open in 2025. Here's some early renders of it. Began with an inventory project of the collection. Research and rate began in 2022, and design really just finalized at the end of December. And we're happy to say that construction started about last week or 2 weeks ago, and The physical elements are almost completed, and we're just waiting to develop some of the digital elements, which is why we're hosting a fundraiser soon. So this is what the space looked like before. That's actually a gas pump. It's one of the only physical remains of the airport um, that was remaining. It was brought to the museum in around 2000 and preserved in around 2017, 2019, I believe. And then that wall in that center is that same wall with that photo in the back. So this is really a whole redesign of the space. Uh, this exhibit will marry both traditional elements as well as new innovative digital elements, most notably four pre-scripted holograms, a projected video. It's meant to engage audiences of all ages, but it's especially meant to also cater towards young audiences who really seem to be attracted to that. And what the goal is to give us permanent space to share this history, as well as begin a new phase of research and collecting. And these are the first images I'm sharing of this. Last week I went, or 2 weeks ago, I went up to Baltimore and began and worked with our designer to film these holograms. And this is two snapshots of that time there. So the left is Gladys Odie, and that's the actress who's playing her. And you can see the card of Gladys Odie as well. And on the right's our actor portraying John Green, and a photo of John Green for reference. So this is, I'm personally very excited to actually see this. When you hear holograms, at least me, I'm like, okay, I'm not exactly picturing it, but now I have a better sense of it. We're very excited for it. The exhibition is just a start. I'm really hoping to reach out, connect with more families as well as other scholars and experts in the area. I've tried sending out letters to possible descendants using just the meager resources available to me. I've never heard back from any of them. I don't have correct addresses or not, but now I have a whole exhibition, website, and material to prove I'm not just some stranger asking about their family. And to help with that, we are starting the exhibition fundraising campaign. The biggest thing I want to mention that it's the fundraising exhibition preview, which is Saturday, May 3rd. It's a preview of the exhibitions from 2 to 4 p.m. It is a fundraiser, so we're charging for the tickets, but we're hoping to raise the remaining funds to complete the project and open on time in the fall. To stay informed, I guess this is also for the video folks. You can scan this, and Donna, I had sent you a list of links. I will send that out again after this, but I do not have that on me. You can also go to the Feel the First website, which is I can put in the chat. So I'll leave it on a good photo while we talk. Okay. Thank you.
So I just posted the links for you
Thank you.
that you sent me, and I didn't have the Field of First one, so sorry.
Oh, I'll share that.
Okay. So thank you, Luke. A lot of information, a lot of, excuse me, new information I hadn't heard. So I'm looking forward to seeing the exhibit and learning more. And I don't have any questions from anybody, but if you want to unmute your microphones and ask any questions, feel free. Oh, whoops. Let's see. So Stacy Hawkins says, thank you for great information, Luke. But if anybody else has any questions they would like to ask, like I said, you can unmute yourself and ask. Okay, well, it doesn't seem like there are any further questions. So again, thank you, Luke. Greatly appreciate you joining us this evening, and look forward to the exhibit opening this fall, as well as I'm looking forward to the Berliner helicopter one as well. So do you know when that one's going to open?
That will hopefully open around the same time as well. I would love to talk more about that as well in the future.
Oh, great. Okay, so with no further questions, let me just double check the chat. Yep, no further questions. I'm just going to say again, thank you, Luke, and greatly appreciate your time tonight. And thank you for everybody to join us. Just to let everybody know, our April history chat is going to be canceled due to a conflict in schedules. So we won't be able to do the April history chat. So we'll be back in May. I believe it's May 18th. We're doing it a week early because of Memorial Day. So you'll get an invitation for the May chat in early May. So again, thank you everybody and good night.
Thank you so much.